I'm so very excited to have Dr. Andrew Xiong on the podcast. He's the first Hmong guest that we have.
Sabayee to you too, and thank you for having me. It's a privilege and honor to be here, and I think that all these years I have accrued so much experience. I'm just really looking forward and being excited to share some of my knowledge with you and with anyone who might like to hear. So it's fine. So.
When I had Dr. Helene Marshall on the podcast, she just talked so positively about you. She said that you have taught her more than anyone else about how to work with students with formal interrupted education.
I really appreciate her for advocating for me, but I also thank her for all the teachings that she gave me as well. So
Before we talk about that, can you talk about your personal experience from growing up in Laos and then moving to America?
I would say that I am a poster child for SLIFE for SLIFE learners. Um, Largely in Laos, there's education back when I was going to school there. In fact, I never got past first grade. I started, I restarted first grade 5 times between ages 5 and 8. So uh, I never got past first grade. So um, also that my family and my dad was with the army, so he was an officer. He was one of the few people that actually spoke broken English, so he was very valuable to the United States military, and so he gets moved around a lot depending on which project they want him to work on. And when he moved, my mom would not stay put, so my mom would drag me along and just go to wherever camp he was stationed at, and we were there. So I didn't get formal education probably more than 3-4 months, at a time, and before we moved to another place and another school. So basically, my dad was my teacher for those years. Um, and that was the beginning of my life education career. So I didn't learn very much, although I did know Lao and Hmong, and at some point I went to almost a year of schooling in first grade in a French, international school in Vientiane. So I don't think it's there anymore. I went back a couple of years ago to look for it, but I couldn't find it anymore. So I don't think they were there anymore. But I was already multilingual, even though I never graduated first grade.
I know that you moved to Green Bay, Wisconsin in 1976. Could you tell us about that?
English language learners program were not, as affluent as now. So uh, they didn't have a lot of trainings for teachers and for school districts at the time, and basically they just kind of did whatever they could to help kids who just came over from Laos or Thailand or Cambodia or Vietnam. And so my family and I, especially my siblings, my uncles who were 17, 18, and 19, we were all put in a room where they just kind of held us at the elementary school for a couple of years. So nobody was there. Nobody was teaching us. We didn't have teachers. We had a tutor, a retired nun, and this is so funny because the retired nun would come in and talk to us in English, and we would just stare at her the whole time for about 6 months. And so just because you're being exposed to some kind of language opportunity or some kind of learning opportunity doesn't mean that it's education. So we were really distrusting at the time. We didn't know whether they were sincere in their effort to help us, or are we just in the way, or maybe we're just a burden or something like that. And it was really tough. And about 6 months later, um, my dad always packed me a sandwich for lunch, and we because when we were in Vientiane, we eat a lot of stuff with soy sauce. So he would put two pieces of bread with a ham sliced in the middle, and then he would put soy sauce on the bread. and so and so I would eat that every day for 6 months. And then one day I was trying to make contact because she did everything the same thing. She came in, talked to us in English, took out a book and started reading. And when she's done with the reading, she laughed, and then we're like staring at each other, talking, play game. And so so we didn't have formal education. So one day I was tired of it, and I broke off a corner of my sandwich and I gave it to her. And to my surprise, she ate it. And that was when I put down my guard and said, wow, this lady, because in the Hmong culture, it's all about eating. It's when you welcome somebody, you serve food. When you go to somebody's house and you give food, that means they respect you. So she ate it. And then next day, she came back and she brought me a ham and cheese sandwich. And she broke off a corner just like I did and gave it to me. And from that moment on, I was like, okay, I can learn from this person because this person ate my food. I ate her food. Now we have a relationship. I can trust her. And so she started and then I started to mimic some of the ABC letters that I knew and some of the few English words that my dad taught me. And she was so amazed. She was like, why did you tell me you knew English? And and I told her in broken English, I not know. But she said, yes, you do. You said I not know. Um, so from that moment on, it was like, flash of lightning, and then everything's opened up. And then she taught me, the consonant, vowel, consonant, and then she taught me to read harder and harder books. And then eventually, about a year and a half later, I was able to go back to second grade, and I was 9 at the time. Yeah, so coming to America and my history of being a SLIFE is much different now than the kids who come over to this country now. I think we have, like, as a principal, I have systems set up so that I can quickly assess how much English they know, how much letters and sound they have, how much numbers they know, and then I would help the teacher design a program and differentiate to where they need me to teach them or need the teacher to teach them, and bring them up to what's the next step up that they need to get to. So it's much different now than when we were SLIFE back in the mid 70s and early 80s. Does that make sense?
I really love that story about the retired nun coming in to work with you. But what I love more about that is the story of you tearing off a piece of or a corner of your sandwich and giving it to her, and then she taking it. And that was the start of the relationship. I feel like that just encompasses everything we need to know initially about working with life, because it's all about relationships.
Exactly. Had she not eaten my sandwich, I would never have opened up, and then the communication door would never have opened, and then who knows how long I would have to stay in that room.
I also feel so sad listening to the story of you being in your classmates or your friends being put into a room with nothing to do until that retired teacher came, or the retired nun came and volunteered her time to work with you. I can't believe that's what people called service before.
I just came back from a visit to um, uh, Arkansas, and largely there's a school district that called me because they knew me as a administrator for the St. Paul Public Schools up here. I kind of get around, and so they kind of knew me from. So one day, the ESL coordinator there called me and said, oh, no, not the ESL coordinator, the special ed coordinator there called me and said, are you Dr. Andrew? And I said, yes, I am. And she goes, do you have any advice for ESL teachers? They have been dropped off at our special ed department, and I don't know what to do. And so, and so I went, I went down there out of my own time to just visit them, to see their program and see if I can give them, hints and suggestions to help them develop program. I brought some ESL programs that we have from our district to go down there and show them. I brought some Hmong English dictionaries down there for them to, use. And so we develop a lot of the SLIFE curriculum up here. I was one of the first few administrators who was helping write SLIFE curriculum for new kids to the country, as well as other kids who were born here and lived here, but they have had experience in SLIFE for a long time. So here in our Twin Cities, we have a lot of mobility. We have kids, Hispanic kids, Lao kids, Hmong kids who travel a lot. There's high mobility. They move from place to place, largely due to occupational, mobility. So they move back and forth between different states. We have some Hmong students here who moved between here and California because California is the farming community. And then during the off season, they come back up here, So there's lots of SLIFE students in our area here, which is why for a long time, I'm such a passionate advocate for quality education for all kids. So, and SLIFE strategies are really good for mainstream kids as well, because we know now that kids, even if they come from the same place, they have multiple intelligence in different areas and different levels and different pace. And so differentiation has been a big issue and strategy that served my school well in the past, 15 years. So I'm big on differentiation, and I'm big on responsive, teaching mutually responsive strategies.
I find it quite tragic to realize that multilingual students and SLIFE are sometimes labeled as needing special education services when it's really just a language thing, meaning it's just language acquisition. Just because they're learning another language and because it's slower for them, the process of learning is slower for them, doesn't mean they have processing issues. MLs are overrepresented in special education programs and underrepresented in gifted programs.
Because uh, they looked at the students and the student felt different. So also now it's special ed, And then I told the coordinator, I said, look, I don't know about down there, but up here, and I think federally, I said, I think, but I was sure it's federally. Federally, we have Title III money and resource for you to start your own, English language learners department. And she goes, really? And this was 2018, 2019. So sad, really sad. You're right.
Yeah, I guess that just shows that everyone is just learning and there's still lots of learning that needs to happen. Let's talk about what it's like for students to come from uh, collectivist cultures like the Hmong society.
Sure. I don't know if you can generalize it to all Hmong, but based on my experience, I have been immersed in Hmong for a good portion of my life, and then now I also straddle between Hmong and Western culture. So I kind of compare the two, and I try to understand what my students are going through or have been going through. So some of the things that I identify as differences are like oral language culture, especially in the Hmong community. Everything is relational. Everything is relational. Everything is interconnected. Okay. Your knowledge was passed down from your grandparents to your parents to you, right? And then history was taught in stories. We didn't have books. There were not historical writings that were put down in writing for a long time. Much of the Hmong culture and history only goes up to about the 1950s, because that's when the French missionaries invented, our current alphanumeric Hmong, Hmong writing system. So a lot of it didn't go beyond that, and ideas and lessons are put, in folk tales, and you learn by apprenticeship. You watch your uncle, you watch your dad, you watch your mom, and you learn. And you make a mistake, they'll slap you, and the next time you don't make the same mistake. So a lot of our kids come to school with that mindset. So when they don't know something, they they're not going to act on it, and they're not going to want to make mistake. So they sit and they watch, and they be very quiet, and they wait for the moment that they know they can trust someone, a teacher, that they can take risk. And until the teacher's able to make the connection and say, you know what, I'm here for you, I'm not going to harm you, I'm watching out what's best for you, and you can trust that I will teach you everything that I can. Until you get that assurance, you just watch. You just remain quiet. And for a long time in our area here in St. Paul and Minneapolis public schools, which is like next to each other like this, bordered by a river, they a lot of our kids who are quiet and listening, they get good grades, even though it doesn't show how much they learned. So then that became a kind of a strategic achievement process for them. So for a long time they did that, until we learned to ask them to be more critical and learn to give them signals and connections of trust. So we started teaching. In my school, I personally take on some professional development where I actually tell them my story. I tell them other stories of kids who are existing in our school, and I tell them, I teach them some of the strategies that have been working. And then once I teach, and any learning process is like 20 different strategies, but what you want to do is you want to do one or two strategies really well. So every year I pick one or two strategies that we're going to practice on this year, and this is all we're practicing, and we're going to do this so well that even in our sleep we could do it. And so we teach them how to work with kids, and eventually a lot of my teachers were able to make breakthroughs without me being there all the time for them. And so you have to treat that process where you teach the teachers, and then the teachers then teach the kids, and they learn from each other, and they teach each other. And then once you have that relationship and connection going, there is no like limit to what the student and the teacher could do together. So in all the schools that I've been principal at, that was always been, my goals, to make sure that, I am an advocate for quality education, and that I take the lead charge in making sure that, since I'm the instructional leader, that I model it, and that I reinforce it with support and resources to make it happen. So yeah, so that's kind of what that process is like, especially for oral language learners.
That's a really good point that I want to share with listeners. Students from oral language traditions, they learn not from books, they don't learn it from reading and writing, they learn from observation, they learn from watching, they observe, they learn, and then there's a teacher there modeling what they have to do, and then it's used right away. It's quite different than the way we learn in Western cultures, in formal academic cultures, where we learn from reading and writing.
I think a key survival process is, if you don't make mistake, you're gonna survive. So, but I maybe I broke away from the traditional, SLIFE, kind of stereotype, because I've always been someone who, as soon as I find somebody, I'm going to make connection and start a relationship, and then I want to open that door of communication between us as soon as possible. Because I waited for so long. I waited for so long for people to reach out to me. At some point, it's part of my obligation as a learner too, to, if they don't know how to reach out to me, let me do part of the reaching out to them and meet them halfway.
Meeting students halfway is exactly the main principle in Dr. Helene Marshall's and Dr. Andrea DeCapro's work of MELP. Can you tell us about the MELP framework and how you've been applying it?
My perception of mutually responsive instruction is that it's a two-way learning paradigm, and it's not you know more than I know, or I know more than you know, and I passing the information on to you. It's about having the risk-free relationship to have a dialogue and conversation. And when you can have that risk-free dialogue and conversation, you could insert any topic or subject in there, and it would be a dialogue. It would be a discussion. It would be, what do you know about it? What do I know about it? And how do we compare? And then you learn more that way. When you are just sitting there and listen to someone who's an expert, and and a lot of our professional development in this country is being talked at. So when my teachers go to a PD, they sit there and they listen to the expert, and then the expert give them some suggestion, and they come back and they try to mimic it. But for me, a really really good PD should be having a good conversation, having good dialogue about what is the situation, what are some positive, and what are some challenges, and how do we go about solving some of those challenges and reinforce the positive. So we do that. Going back to mutually responsive, I mean, that's how I see it. It's a two-way street for people to teach and learn from one another. And a lot of times teachers have the difficulty and challenge of bringing themselves down to the level of the kids, to where we are mutually learning and teaching each other. So I, again, as a principal, I always teach my teachers, check your ego at the door. When you come in through that door, okay, I want you and the kids to have the same level of understanding, respect, and mutually exchanging education. Sure, you got your certification to teach from the state of Minnesota. Most of the time you got your 4-year degree, and you might even have a master's degree, and the kid's only in second grade, whatever. But human to human interaction always demand respect and mutual responsibility. And I always teach my teachers that, and I always teach my kids, my students, that as well. So it's about that relationship. And Dr. Marshall already explained really well, how important and influential establishing relationship is. And I won't go into that, but that is a key factor in making sure that learning is a two-way street. Yeah, and it's not even just in education. It's in all fields pretty much. I'll give you an example. For the last 40 years, especially the Hmong elders who came here from, during the 70s and 80s, they still don't trust hospitals and clinics and modern medicine. Okay. So when they go to the doctors, they try to avoid any operations. They try to avoid any drug suggestions, because they just want to go back home, rest, and take herbal medicine that they have in their backyard, right? So I worked with a number of clinics that we started to disseminate information about, where the medicine came from. It came from some of the herbs, right? Cilantro, garlic, a lot of those materials or ingredients in those vegetables are in our medicine. So we try to kind of bridge it in that way, mutually responsive, teaching each other, hey, look, this might be a tablet or a capsule, but all these little white powder and stuff, They came from there in your garden, So they go, oh, so you already ground it up and already, wet it and dry it. And then so that's what it, so we say, yeah, that's what happens when we make medicine, and so it eases their mind and they understand, when you put it in that term. But if you're a doctor and you said, well, these are medicine, well researched, has been used for the last 100 years, aspirin, amoxicillin, penicillin. Yeah, it's been used for a long time. Yeah, it's effective. Well, no, they don't understand that. But if you explain it in a mutually responsive way, like the way, I explain it, then they know. Oh, oh yeah, well, okay, now I don't have to go home and pick some vegetables and boil it and drink the juice when I could just take this, So we try to, help them understand how medicines, were made and how diagnoses, were done. And one day, I went with a doctor to one of my aunt's house, and doctors rarely do house calls over here. Nurses do house calls, but doctors really. And the doctors went over there, and I told the doctor, I said, look, when you get there, put your shoes by the door. Ask if it's okay to come in, and then when you go in, if they don't ask you to sit down on a chair, you wait until they tell you where to sit down, and then you tell them, I'm here to see how you're doing. Just have conversation. Don't just get into the medicine right away and say, oh yeah, we're here to, remedy you because you have these symptoms. And just talk to them, be human being, be, interactive, get to know them. And so the doctor did that and got a really good response from, his patient. So then he said, well, you know what, I'm going to go back and I'm going to teach other doctors this. And so, we got to the point where now, even in the hospitals, the major hospitals here, when Hmong women gives birth to babies, they actually have a Hmong diet here of, of rice and chicken broth, boiled chicken for them. And so now those hospitals that have those Hmong diet menu, the Hmong, women flock to them to have kids. And so now everybody, all the major hospitals here have that diet because they're in competition for, birthing. And so, so things are slowly changing, but there has to be a culturally, mutually responsive interaction and learning and teaching one another. And the doctors were good enough that, even though they're doctors, they were still, in terms of their ego, they still put their egos down low enough to listen and to talk and do things that are not ordinary in their hospital setting, but you win a lot of these people over by doing that.
That really shows that mutually responsive instruction is not really about the instruction. It's also about this can be applied to other fields such as medicine and social work. So it's about how do we meet our students, their families in the middle, and not just saying, come to our side. We have to meet in the middle.
Because oftentimes hospitals, you make a diagnosis and you treat the symptoms, right? They are really, the doctors are really taught to be culturally and mutually responsive. And so those that have, big ego, they never try. But those that are willing to do the job as, treating and servicing the public, then those, doctors, they have done well. So so we did well in education, but we want to branch off to other fields as well.
So another way of thinking about mutually responsive instruction is taking students' cultures and the families' cultures into consideration when we are teaching or when we're working with them.
Right, because unless you are you can help make that connection, it takes longer to make the breakthrough. But if you make the connection early on and you get it out of the way, then everything after that is a piece of cake.
So you talked about making connections. So how can teachers make connections with their students from oral language cultures?
Well, and I've been instructional leader for a long time, and right now I can sadly tell you that like especially in St. Paul public schools, we have about 75% diverse population, about 40% Hmong population. Yeah, yeah, and um, the the number of the percentage of teachers of color is only 13%. I can tell you that for a long time, there's not a lot of interconnections, and not a lot of time, a lot of occurrences of teachers being able to mutually be responsive to the parents, the communities, and the kids. I still hear as early as 2018, 2019 when I retired, I I still heard a teacher from another school saying, "Here we speak English," you know. Yeah, yeah.
So sad.
And I stopped her and I said, "Hey, when you have time, can I just chat with you? I have I have some feedback, some continuous improvement feedback for you." So I talked to her and I said, "Look, I know you said that, but think about," and I didn't say it was wrong. I said, "Think about how you would feel if a Hmong teacher come to you and say, hey, uh, when you're in our country, speak our language. How would you feel?" And she said, I didn't realize I said that. And I said, yeah, well, it's okay as long as you know and that you will make every effort to make sure that other kids don't feel like that, you know. And I said, I trust that you will do your best,
Right.
And so it wasn't a, penalty or anything like that. I just like to remind her, and every time I have conversation with people, I just like to remind them, um, you don't have to carry a big stick. You could just teach them the reasonable teaching moment product, and they will get it. So it's just like to remind them that, hey, there are other ways to approach to approach other people. That's probably not one. I didn't say that, but just kind of helping them realize that's probably not the only strategy out there. But what I try to do is I try to teach the teachers that I work with, to be more mutually responsive. So everywhere I go, I would do that. And a large part of it too is K-12 continue to struggle with, achievement gap. They still teach, talking to strategies. Teachers still stand up at the board and talk to the kids, and we're trying to break away from that. Curriculum and instruction monopolization by textbook companies and assessment, companies are still pretty rampant out here. Everything kind of in the school district kind of run through them. So teachers have a lot of those challenges in their mind. Um, those teachers that did get MELP, training. I didn't tell Dr. Marshall this, but every once in a while I go back to the district that they train, and I looked at what are some of their programs that they do, and teachers who try to use MELP program, they get so exhausted from extra planning, from fighting against administrators, fighting against school district, fighting against standardized testing, because SLIFE kids learn at a different pace and a different style, and you need to differentiate. And it might not, just because you learn the strategies this year, it doesn't mean that it's going to translate to all your kids passing, the assessment test at the end of the year. I mean, it takes longer than that. ELL students takes 5 to 7 years for basic, standard English, let alone, fully comprehending vocabulary and comprehension. So it takes a long time, and school districts are always, being impacted by all these assessment and all these legislature and things like that. So not a lot of people, have the patience to see and follow through a long-term program. They want something immediate. So just because you bring somebody in, you bring Dr. Marshall in, you expect that next year's score is going to be boom, up. Well, if Dr. Marshall could do that, she'd be like a billionaire by now. So but education is not like that. It's about methodically taking few strategies, working it really well, plan really well, implement really well, measuring every increment steps of the way, and then it's a long-term process. So those are some of the challenges, and I try to make sure that teachers continue to do that. Don't break down mentally. Do as much as you can. You need help, I'm going to provide you support and resources for you to differentiate to the needs of the kids. I always come back to one mantra, okay? And my one mantra is that as a teacher, as an educator, whether you're a teacher or a principal or a counselor or whatever, okay, your first and foremost job, okay, is to be an advocate for quality education for kids. You cannot settle for some achievement and some it's okay for them not to achieve, okay? If you think like that, then education is not your field. What you want is you want every one of your kids to have some achievement, okay? The achievement might be different, incrementally, but your goal is you want everybody, all the students under your care to show some achievement. And so if you can't vouch for that and you can't advocate for that, whether you're talking to your principal or whether you're talking to your district, administrators or whatever, if you can't do that, then you're really in the wrong field because it's not okay for one kid or for some kids to fail and let them down. So I'm big on that issue. So yeah, but it's also really taxing both physically and mentally as well. And one of the biggest reason a lot of the teachers have given me over the years to not do it is because they would say something like, well, I can't learn the language. I don't want to go to their house. It's not safe to learn the culture. Yeah. They would say things like that. And I would say, look, those are all the things that you shouldn't be thinking about. What you're thinking about is, if I'm teaching 2-digit math adding today, okay, what do I know about my kids, my students, that which group already know, which group didn't know, which group, have a different mindset. There are lots of community agencies here that bridges school with community. You can ask them, you can talk to them, and you can always, get help. And it doesn't mean that you have to learn the language or go visit them every day. It doesn't mean like that. You just have to figure out, okay, what are some strategies for me to start a relationship? If you know that, your Hmong students are quiet and they're waiting and they're not responding and they're watching you all the time to see what you're going to do next, talk to them and find out, hey, how can I help you? How can you help me? What are some things that we could share together? So I gave them an example of my sandwich, and they would say like, well, schools don't allow teachers to give their sandwich to the kids. So I would say something like, well, you could stop at the Hmong grocery store and you could buy those packages, of sandwiches that they make over there for like 59 cents. And you could use that. It doesn't matter what you bring or what you offer. The point is you offer relationship. So I have to give out a lot of different strategies over the years, and those who took the suggestions and feedback well, they've done really well. I have a super second grade teacher that has just been flying all these years, and for the first 2 years she struggled. It was hard for her. She lives in a all white community, and she came into the St. Paul schools and teaching there. And after I gave her, some suggestions, advice, and we start having conversations and dialogue, I learned from her a lot from her. I asked her about what was like for her and for her family and for kids to view learning or to go through learning. And then I gave her some examples of what I went through and what her kids went through. And from that, she developed a program that she differentiated to almost every kid in the classroom, to the point where some of her parents loved the differentiation so much, they wanted her to email that planning and learning, strategy to them so that they could learn it and then help the kids at home. And when she did that for them, I mean, they brought her like food up, to fill her whole, refrigerator. But the main thing was, um, every time she called the parents, or every time she needed something from the family, every time she needed something from the kids would die for her, and the parents would give her anything she wanted. So it's about having that relationship, and it's about sharing your life experience with people, so that you can trust each other, you can learn from one another.
So this is a good point to talk about. Why is assimilation not an answer?
I think largely, um, to me, assimilation is like a one-dimensional, dominant cultural rules type of relationship. When we came to this country, and through my story, it wasn't a two-way street. They made up their mind that I was like, my family and I, who were school age, were going to put in a room, and that was it, right? It's a one directional, and you sink or you swim, and you find a way to assimilate, right? It's one directional, even though the dominant culture adapts some of those strategies from the non-dominant, cultures into the system, but it's their own pick and choosing of what they want, right? We take the good and we throw away the bad, right? Well, to you, good or bad, but to me, how do you know it's bad, right? So when you take something that you think is bad and I'm thinking is good and you throw that away, well, what does that say about you and me? Should I trust you when you tell me to assimilate, right? so so it's about doing that. And right now, a big assimilation process that we are still facing, and it's a big challenge in the educational system, is standardized testing, right? So if you don't do well after being in the country 1 year, right, then you were not proficient, you're not standard, okay? And when you're not standard, then you're not achieving, you're not an achiever. So we have to give you more work, right? We have to let you stay in school longer after school, right? We have after school program. So all those kids who did not make, achievement, doing after the test, well, you're going to stay longer. There's more after school programs for you. And then you get labeled, and then pretty soon it's really daunting for you as a student to feel like you've been penalized. And I was going to mention, like, I told my teachers not to say this, but they keep saying this, and even to kids often, where they say, well, I have to teach you, and if you can't read and write by third grade, then most likely you're going to be in jail. They say that all the time, and I can't. And I tell them, I said, don't do that. Don't do that. And they say, it's true. It's research based. I said, yes, sir. It's research based in a Western culture. But if you're that kid, and you don't understand research, and you don't understand the connotation of standardized tests, how would you feel? How would you feel? Put yourself in their shoes. Do you think after hearing that they would trust you? They would put all, they would die for you. They would, put 110% learning, in their effort for you. No, they won't, because you feel so inadequate, and you feel so put down that it's hard to come back from. And especially when you're already born with a culture where especially if you come from an oral culture, where you don't want to make mistakes, you don't want to look bad, you don't want to fail, because fail means you fail your teacher, you fail your parents, you fail your whole community. Then you know what, I'm not going to take any chance, and I'm not going to take any risk. And what I'm doing, I'm going to stay here, I'm going to stare at you, and since I just stare at you, I'm not going to do anything wrong. It's safer to not do anything wrong than to make a mistake and show you that, oh yeah, I failed, I couldn't pass the test. So it's about that. And assimilation has been detrimental to many of our students' growth, emotionally, physically. Even kids who were born here, um, especially African American kids and Hispanic kids who lived in the United States for a long time, it's always every year after the test, we know which group, we know what students are going to be labeled non-achievers. And we know those kids know, oh yeah, well, after school program, more extra worksheet to take home. I'm not a good student in school, and now my parents gonna be mad because I didn't pass my test. So then they shut down. And when they shut down, then there is no relationship, there is no dialogue, there is no conversation. And then what do? It takes for every month of kids shutting down, it takes a year to win them back. And you can't waste time like that. You can't start off at the beginning already in a hole a mile deep. You want to start off as shallow as possible. And that means try some of these mutually responsive strategies.
So, what you're saying is when we work with students from other cultures, it takes a long time for us to develop a relationship with them. And even though it feels like we're not making a lot of headway when we're developing a relationship, it's important that we do. And developing a relationship is always a long term activity. Thank you, Dr. Andrew Xiong, for this hour of conversation. It has helped me understand working with SLIFE in a different way. And thank you for sharing with us your passion. It is quite evident that you love SLIFE students, particularly among students, and you know that they can achieve, and you're helping us think about merging and understanding their cultures more. This will help us understand our. This will now help us design our practice to be more mutually responsive.